That is staffed by a staff sergeant most shifts. It's supposed to be every shift, but they have stand-ins as well from different ranks from time to time. But that person is a risk manager who monitors all of the division. And if there's a shortage, say in East Hants, for example, but they see that Pictou is up by a few, they would, during that shift or during that watch, they would redeploy a couple of members perhaps from Pictou to help out East Hants, or Swaganagity to help out East Hants, or vice versa. And we've rendered mutual support ourselves over the summertime. So you can rest assured service delivery was always top of mind, as well as security and safety of our citizens and our members. And as we had these shortages, the OCC was instrumental, and it's a bit of a change from previous years, but they were instrumental in making sure that the members were moved back and forth as required to ensure a high delivery of service. The two public servant positions that you've also approved, they're still in process. The bottleneck there is the processing of the actual classification of positions, where they're relatively new types of positions. As with all government things, processes have to be followed, and there's very strict rules as it relates to how a person is going to be paid, how much, and the types of duties that will be within their scope. That takes some time by classification analysts to work that out, but we're getting very close. So our operations update remained consistent over the summer. It's always a busy time for us. COVID continued to be a threat to public and officer safety. We did have an ease up, as everyone knows, but now things are ramping up yet again. We're alive to an outbreak within the borders of East Hants that is significant. Our members have been briefed that if they're to attend an area of an outbreak, that they have to take all precautions, that they have all their training and their personal protective equipment has to be worn. So we're doing our best to make sure that our officers are safe, and that if they encounter the public, that they'll render appropriate service regardless of their status as it relates to COVID. A big part of officer safety is public safety. Cross-transmission from attending one scene and then going to another is also something that we're mindful of, and our officers have been advised and strongly cautioned that if they do attend one of these scenes, they have to properly decontaminate after such a visit, so that if they do get called to another priority call, they're not going to be doing a transmission in any way. Motor vehicle crashes and mental health calls seem to be high over the summer. That's not unlike other summers, but they're worth mentioning. They took a lot of our time, and we thank our partners. Those are calls for service, which ambulance and fire crews are extremely helpful on the highways, and of course ambulance is instrumental in supporting us when it comes to mental health calls for service. But our members were kept very busy with that. The regular summer pace was as anticipated, and you'll see that through the calls for service that when we look at that page, that they're consistent with previous years. The operation that we had planned for July to be on the water in Grand Lake, that fell through as a result of the plume of blue-green algae, or the threat of some kind of issue. And for our officer safety and the safety of the public, we mothballed that plan. But it's something we hope to undertake in the future. Shall we continue?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so one thing I'm pleased to talk about here today, Terry Fogarty. Many of you probably know Terry. He was our community policing officer in recent year. Terry was off for a period of time, but he's now back. And with his return, we're revitalizing the East Hants crime prevention groups, as well as reactivating the citizens on patrol. We have a meeting. We already have had one meeting. We're having another meeting this week to finalize some planning. That's exciting for us because it re-engages people that are highly engaged in their own communities in crime prevention and those types of initiatives. So that's wonderful. As you all know, police can't be everywhere at once. So these are people that want to bring safer homes and safer communities to where they live. And we're excited to be a part of that. A big part of Terry's role also is going to be proactive intelligence gathering. Terry, because of the scope of his duties, he's going to be out in the community. He's going to be speaking to the locals, speaking to business people, and gleaning from them their priorities for policing, the things that keep them awake at night, and enable us to hear from the ground what those concerns are, so that we can bring it to Martin's attention to drive our operations priorities. So October 4th is the start of a new shift schedule, and this coincides with the 4th corporal position. And so previously we had our 4 watches, but they were supervised by 3 corporals. Obviously that doesn't work math-wise, and those corporals had to tread left and right over the schedule with their own schedule. And so there were gaps in supervision. Sometimes there was not a supervisor working. Sometimes you'd be supervised by one supervisor one week and a different one the next week. That's just the way it was with the numbers that we had. With the implementation of the 4th corporal, which you've approved, again, thank you. We are now going to have a dedicated supervisor to each watch. So when there's members on the ground in East Hants, they will have a supervisor working with them every single time. That's going to really enhance our supervision, our accountability, the consistency of those watches. Martin and myself will be able to sort of isolate if there's any kind of issues, work with that supervisor to address them. Very complicated to do that when you have 3 supervisors that are juggling different portfolios at different times. But now we'll be able to laser focus on any issues. So we're really excited about that. Not that there are issues, but it just makes things easier for us. We're going to have the new shift schedule is going to do another couple of things for us. Number one, it's going to provide. We flattened out. We had a couple of double shifts, power shifts during the old schedule. Well, we've eliminated one of those. Friday will still remain a power shift. Traditionally, Friday's a busier evening, so that remains a power shift. But we've eliminated the other. That's flattened out the spikes, and it's enabled to have a little bit of an overlap between the 2 watches. So our day shift, as that's going off, they'll have about an hour and a half of respite back at the office to get their files written up, to brief the watch that has just come in on the priorities of the shift for the day, so that they can get out there and hit the ground running, where before they just butted up against each other. One's kind of going out the door as the other's coming in, and there's not as much room for crossover. We've all talked about the 24-hour policing. Through this new schedule, we're going to be able to spread those shifts both back into the early morning hours if need be, or push them deeper into the night hours in order to close a gap and have different coverages if we so choose. So it's providing a better work-life balance for members, and I've touched on the flexibility that it has to transition. So at this point, I wanted to talk a little bit about traffic calming initiatives. It's a discussion that I've been having both with the CAO. We'll take a pause.
For me, it would be.
Give it a whack.
Water out of it. Oh, yeah. So we've got Jesse coming over there.
Hey!
She's on. Good morning, all fans, okay?
I always tell people to check me in the hand.
Ready to go, Gee?
So CAO Ramsey, as well as Councillor Garden-Cole, and I have had different discussions on different days about concerns in the community, particularly White Road and White Estates, for speeding traffic and those types of things. It's something that our members are aware of. To the best of their abilities, they're making proactive patrols in these areas. But as we've discussed previously, and I know it's appreciated amongst the folks in the room, those types of policing activities really detract from other roles and other jobs that the members are tasked with doing. It's we can't dedicate a member to be there full time, and it's very difficult to catch people in the act when they're speeding in these areas. And so a resident, particularly someone who's home for the bulk of the day, they're gonna see every speeder, and every time they're out for a walk, they're gonna encounter someone who's driving aggressively, and that's frustrating for them. It's very difficult for police to be there with the consistency in order to catch everybody every time. We're doing our best, but it's never going to measure up. So I reached out to our counterparts in headquarters to talk a little bit about what options we have in that regard, perhaps red light cameras or speeding cameras, perhaps other types of technology that can help to identify speeders as they go by, and so that is a passive thing for police, and we can still hold people accountable, but you don't have a living, breathing member present, which is chewing up time and resources. They got back to us a little, and something that's being developed provincially, and perhaps, forgive me if folks are already aware of this, but the Motor Vehicle Act is being replaced by the Traffic Safety Act, and within that act, these specific types of initiatives are going to be addressed in detail, and they're going to be looking at that. So we have some preliminary, pricing as it relates to those types of initiatives. We don't have to go over them here today. They're not trivial in expense. Some of them come with a price tag, but it's a discussion worthy. Once we find out exactly what the new act says, perhaps we can get into more detail about that. However, I would ask the council to perhaps give consideration to traffic calming initiatives. It's very difficult if we're going to be realistic, it's very difficult for police to be all places at one time. We have different folks that perhaps don't catch the ear of a councillor, but we receive the calls for service and the complaints from different areas of the municipality. People are concerned about speeding and they're concerned about aggressive driving. So it's not just this one area. There are many areas that this is predominant in the lives of our local residents, and we can't spread everybody that thin to address traffic issues. The benefit of traffic calming initiatives is it organically kind of forces the local residents as well as the visitors to adjust their own driving habits, to address their own driving style. Things like speed bumps, things like the way that roads are laid out. If you've ever visited the headquarter building in Halifax, I don't know if anyone here has, but you'll notice that there's a winding S-turn that goes into headquarters. Well, that's not just about looks. It's about, we don't want someone to be able to get in a cube truck and stomp the gas and drive directly into our building. You know what I mean? It's all there for a purpose. And so these are the types of things that, as we move forward, we can give thought to for the types of design or the types of initiatives that can be retrofitted into existing design that may help to organically calm some of the aggressive driving. All that said, we'll still get out there and we'll still be a part of the solution. I just fear that it's hard for us to measure up when it's happening all over the place, and when our priority calls for service are things like crashes or impaired driving, other offenses in progress, or investigating offenses that people demand high degree of service for, break and enters, sexual assaults, those types of things. That's always going to take priority. So on our next slide, we have the calls for service, and I'll ask you to take a few minutes and digest that. We broke it down the same way, the types of calls for service for this quarter, the last quarter, with the little C denotes.
I can interrupt your Staff Sergeant. Councillor Perry, you indicated you would like to speak. Would you like to do this now or after the presentation?
I'd like to just do it right now because we're just talking about.
Yeah, forgive me. Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Michael Perry.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the RCMP. It's been a busy summer, as you said, and a job well done by all. When you talk about the traffic calming initiatives, I know speeding's an issue everywhere. As soon as the road gets paved, it becomes a racetrack, and there's nothing you can do to stop that, and roads are being paved all over the place. But in this municipality, a lot of the roads are provincial roads. They're owned by the province. So we do not have the ability to put some of these traffic measures in place. Is there anything going on at the higher level of the RCMP with the province to look at being able to tackle these issues on provincial roads?
That's a great question, and through you, Chair. I'm not aware of a provincial initiative in that regard. And forgive me, I should have differentiated. I was more speaking about our municipal roads and the white estates and those types of things with respect to the power that we have here to deal with that. But you're absolutely right. It's something that needs to be addressed on a wider scale. I'm not aware of that, but I can look into
Okay,
it.
no, I just wondered if there was conversations going on, because I know speeding's an issue, not just in East Hants. It's becoming an issue everywhere. If you look at the stats of all the motor vehicle accidents and that have happened this summer and previous. So, thank you.
No,
At all, Councillor?
thank you.
That's all for now. Thank you, Chair.
Seeing no one left, Sergeant, Staff Sergeant, you continue.
Thank you, Chair. So the little C denotes where charges were laid. For example, other criminal code, we had 40 incidents where a complaint was made. However, in only 12 instances was a charge actually laid. So that just gives you a little orientation there. The 3-year average takes the average over the past 3 years. Any questions arising from the slide?
Councillor Mitchell.
Chair, through you to the Staff Sergeant. The total calls, 1247. I was adding up the numbers and didn't get that, so I'm just curious to see where the difference was.
Yes, I'm seeing that now myself.
I had 836 when I add them up my...
You're quick. It's something that we're gonna have to, I'll have to amend that, and I can send it back out, but forgive me, we'll have to adjust that.
At all, Councillor Mitchell?
Just a...
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Goodness, my mind's gone. So, thank you for bringing that up, but the proper explanation is, these are but a snapshot of our probably most interesting calls for service. There's many other calls for service. And so the variation that you're seeing are those ones that we're just not talking about. Someone coming in for criminal records checks, perhaps other nuisance calls, things that we didn't report on. But the total calls, completely inclusive of absolutely, VIN verifications on trailers, those types of things would be included in that number. So,
Just another question on the mental health. When you do mental health calls, do you have mental health personnel go with you from the Department of Health, or?
so the answer is no. Is it a desire and a preference? Absolutely. We just do not have access to those services. What we do have, our members are given training with respect to de-escalation of mental health calls, or giving training as it relates to identifying when someone's in mental health distress and differentiating that between someone who's perhaps intoxicated or acting out very, very poorly. Not that it doesn't necessitate a police response in both instances, or perhaps necessitate, similar looking intervention, but it enlightens the member to the fact that this is perhaps a medical emergency as much as it's a police criminal emergency, and we make sure that the ambulance is standing by if we can, and if it's on the lower end of the spectrum. We do solicit the service of the 1-800 mental health line where there's trained counselors and trained clinicians on the other end that can take the call and perhaps do a quick amount of support, or even not diagnosis, but can help us and the person that we're serving identify what needs to happen next. Perhaps it is a trip to the hospital, or perhaps they just needed someone to speak with, and that person through the phone can address the concerns right then and there, and we've had success with that. We would love to move to a model where clinicians are available to be with us, or to be at hand. We're just not there yet. They do have that in the city, and that happens with mobile crisis teams and so on and so forth. We don't have access to it.
Just to finish up, do you think with the new change of government that this will be a priority to get the new government to work more effective with the RCMP across the province?
I'm not sure. I'd like to think that will always be the case, that will be a priority. I'm not sure if that's going to be one of their priorities. I know mental health was a huge topic of discussion for the most recent election, and healthcare and mental health are big topics. So I'd like to think there'll be some movement, but I can't say for sure.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all.
Seeing no one else, continue on.
And so the last slide before any general questioning, I put in, are all the TVs on now? So I spoke with the CAO earlier in the summer about a branding initiative that was brought to me by one of our members, one of our acting supervisors actually. His name's Mike Wilcock, and Mike came from a jurisdiction where they were proud to display municipal branding on their police vehicles. So we thought this was a great idea. Reached out to the municipality to see if we could get permission to use your branding on our vehicles, and that was granted. So we solicited a local print shop to. They've also helped you with your branding decals as well. So they knew exactly what we needed, and got those done. And I'm proud to say that it helps our vehicles stand out amongst others when our residents see East Hants police cars out in the jurisdiction. They know that it's their police. Not everyone can understand perhaps what the number or naming convention of the vehicles. 15 is East Hants, and B is a vehicle under a municipal contract, and 4 is just the number of the car. So that's car 4 under a municipal contract in East Hants, 15 Bravo 4. Well, that's a lot for someone in the municipality to kind of figure out on their own. But once they see that sticker, they can quickly identify, oh, that's one of our cars. And perhaps if they see it in another jurisdiction, it might, it helps to raise accountability and raise awareness for us. I will caution though that you'll probably see this sticker ripping up and down the 101 between exit 7 and Mount Uniacke. And so it's not really it is out of our jurisdiction, but we're trying to get to Mount Uniacke in haste, right? As opposed to going through the back way, which takes substantially longer if you're going priority call for service. So priority calls, generally the members will take the highway. It's a lot quicker. And also we do run that. We do police a stretch of the 101 in the Mount Uniacke area. So I'm happy to share that with you here today. So any final thoughts or questions for myself or Martin?
Kind of throw open the floor for a second, but I kind of like to see this generated questions in general manner, because the staff sergeant has made himself available for specific things outside of this forum, so keep that in mind. First up, not Councillor, I was gonna say John McDonald, but he's gone. Public member Densmore.
Going back to your calls of service, are you aware that you're actually missing calls of service?
That we're,
You're missing them? And what is, and I've been, people in my area have been reported, is that they're calling the RCMP, not 911, that they don't believe it should be 911, and they get put on hold. And they're on hold for 15, 20 minutes to the point they hang up. Right? And then one fella actually called the Truro Police Department for a guy messing around the excavators on the Goss Bridge. That, I don't know how you can get around that. It could be just the night of how busy it is. But there's at least 4 examples given to me. And I'm actually the guy who answered the phone call at Truro Police.
really. So that's something I'm gonna have to address for their operations center. As you know, all the calls after hours, they go right to the OCC. And I wasn't aware that there were some calls that were dropped, after a period of on hold.
But they're on hold 15, 20 minutes. And then one fellow hung up and he called back again, was put back on hold again. And then he called the Truro Police Department. Well, the Truro Police Department's not going to Goss Bridge.
Right.
And he said what his complaint was is that in and around the excavators in there, now it could have been the security guard, he just said, I see somebody messing around the excavators.
And which bridge was that, sorry?
Sorry?
Which bridge?
Goss Bridge?
Goss Bridge.
The one that they're working on going across the Stewiacke River, or Shubenacadie River? And when somebody calls, they pick up the phone to call the police, at that particular point in time, that's the most important thing in their mind. If they get put on hold and they feel like they're brushed off,
Yeah,
then they hesitate about calling again.
yeah. No, you're right. Like say, I'll have to address that with OCC and I'll get a reply. And I'm not sure if they have any statistics in that regard. How many calls they receive versus when they go back to the line, how many are dropped, I'm not sure, but I'll look into that and I'll see if they have a solution. I'm guessing, and I'm only guessing, is that it is times that are very busy and they're just taking priority calls, and 911 will always trump
Yeah.
the
But
general line number.
Yeah, and I understand that. It's just that the fact is they call, they got basically put on hold, they forgot about me, click, I'm not calling again.
Yeah, yeah.
And one of the biggest thing is you want people to call you.
Oh, yes.
And you don't want to flood 911 with nuisance calls. For lack of better words.
And, just making a suggestion off the top of my head, I'll ask them what they have in store, but I know some retail businesses as well as other parts of the government now, after a period of on hold, it'll prompt through the menu to say, if you'd like to leave your name and number, we'll have someone call you back.
Yeah.
And maybe that's an option instead of waiting on hold. But I'll explore that and report back.
Okay.
Thank you.
That all, public member?
Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Eisner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Corey. What's your take on this speed, electronic permanent speed machine? I don't know what's the term for them, but they're up on the post. They're permanently. I see them down in Mahone Bay area, Lunenburg, and some in Fall River. They're permanent too, I think. What do you think? They're a good thing, or are they expensive to operate?
They do come with a charge, price. They, depending on how they're used, they can be very effective. A lot of those devices, they have different modes. There's the active mode where they're actually displaying your speed.
Yes.
And also there's ghost modes where they look like they're off, but they're actually not. And they're recording as people go by. They're making a digital record of every time and every speed that goes by. And so if the agency responsible for that jurisdiction takes that information and says, wow, we have a real issue between 4:30 and 5:30 every day of the week, then that can help us to focus police resources during those times. So if used and that data is, if that data is data mined and we try to see the trends, it can be very effective. And it is a passive thing. It does alert residents to when they're speeding. I know myself, if I see the little thing flashing red, it kind of wakes me up. Oh boy, I'm a few over, and I tap my brakes. So I think they are effective. They do come with a cost, though, and there's risk of vandalism and those types of things. But it goes back to our question about provincial initiatives. If they're on provincial roads, who's going to pay for those? Who's going to maintain and look after them? I know that through TIR, we currently we have a couple that are working. Perhaps it's time for more. I would appreciate any feedback from yourself or others if they think they're a good initiative, they want to see more, or if they think it's a bad initiative for some reason. I'd welcome that feedback.
I just see it through residents of my way that they would like to see some to keep, and it's going through Mahone Bay. When you come off the intersection, you're coming down from the highway. It's a hill there, and it does remind you real quick, and you are off 20 kilometers over. So it's a very effective for me just to go through that area. So I'm positively think they'd be helpful more. I don't think it's be deterrent. People like thinking that they're being watched, but I think it's just a reminder.
Yeah.
That's my take on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, I find out that who it was. Jesse, our director.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment on the digital speed display signs, just for reminder of municipal engagement in those programs. So we have two municipally owned digital speed display signs for interest in locations. We correspond with the RCMP and take in feedback through emails or council on different locations, and we set them up and we exchange the data collected with the RCMP, who leverages it, and they leverage other data that they've got. So we have two currently. There is that. We have also wanted to flag that we've got a report coming in October through a motion of council to discuss community signage for awareness on speeding. And what will not be part of that conversation is more advanced discussions on speed mitigation, but that may be something that council wants to entertain in a future report. So I would suggest that is a bigger conversation, and the RCMP involvement is one piece of the puzzle, but there's many other complex topics that need to be addressed, because that's only one avenue. You can't individuals, humans can't monitor one site all the time. Digital speed space lines provide awareness. Signage provides awareness, but those that are going to speed anyway will. So there has to be acknowledgement about that, and we've got to have a bigger conversation of what is the right level of service that we can provide and mitigate to the communities. So that's just some comments I wanted to provide from a staff perspective.
Building on that, then who has the ultimate authority on where there's a deployed? Is it RCMP or is it with staff?
Through Mr. Chair, through a deployment, if the RCMP asked us to put up a sign in a specific location, we're just going to do it, because we're not going to ask the whys. We're likely just going to do it, but we would deploy in different locations based on.
No, that's not my question. My question is, who has the authority to deploy them? If you're going to put one in Maitland or you're going to put one in Rawdon, who has the authority? Or is that in consultation with with RCMP. I want to know,
So through the deployment, it's a municipal choice. The two that are, they're municipal assets, and it's municipal data collection. So the authority of our municipal assets are our choice, and through consult, like we ask for permission, and we don't have official dialogue with the province of written permission, but we do notify them of different locations we're putting up if on a provincial road.
if a person, a counselor, wanted a speed indicator in a certain area, who is the person that does that? Who's the go-to person? Who authorizes it?
Who authorizes it? So we make decisions through staff. So I would caution everyone, if it's going to be a hot potato, we only have 2 assets. So you can't call up staff and get one tomorrow. That's just not how it works. And it ultimately, the authority goes through the CAO, who is the one employee that makes the ultimate decisions, and that role delegates authority of our location operationally through staff. It's not these are technical assets,
So it is the CAO then, is what I'm asking.
ultimately.
All right, okay. CAO, would you like to weigh, because I'd like to see my question answered, if I could.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to answer your question, the process has been so far that requests have been dealt with between the RCMP counselors and the Director of Operations. So if there's advice that needs to be sought on different areas, Jesse and I will collaborate on those discussions. We haven't had a need to have a formal policy put in place to determine who, what, when, and where. It's been fairly organic to this point. So we don't have a policy that says who exactly has the authority to put them where. If we got into a situation where we had competing demands, then we would consider putting a policy in place. But right now, it seems to be working fairly well the way it is. If council wants to put more formality around that, we can certainly bring a policy and a process as to how that happens to this group and have that going forward. But to date, we haven't required that.
So then, if a counselor would request, who would they request that to? Yourself?
They would request that through Jesse.
Through Jeff.
Yeah.
There's my answer. Okay, very good. Counselor Sandra Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Jesse. Just wondering what the typical speed limit is in a subdivision, and is that posted?
I'll get you here just
Perfect.
there.
50 kilometers an hour.
Which I find really surprising, just because subdivisions are, and is that something that is mandated, that the speed by municipalities? In their own?
That's through provincial legislation. So you're on a rural road, it's 50. If it's not posted, it's 50.
If it's not posted, it's
If it's
50.
not, like, so there should be a posting at the entrance of any subdivision, but you won't see a post on every street. So as soon as you enter a subdivision, the first sign you see is kind of the governance throughout, and you'll see, and it'll be 50. It's consistently 50 across every public road in East Hants.
So is it possible to lower that? Just when a person thinks about it, you know, that the speed limit is 50 going up through the village, but in a subdivision, as we all know, because we've all got them in our districts, you know, it's much more of an intimate residential area, houses closer to the road. You know, it just seems like 50 seems excessive in these small areas. But in saying that, I am looking forward to a conversation about how to mitigate the speed. And I'm referring to the subdivisions because that's what I've been getting the most complaints about. You know, maybe looking at, as the staff sergeant refers to, you know, passive interventions might be something that we need to do going down the road. Just because with more development going on in subdivisions, people are put in a position where there's more residents coming in, and considerably more traffic going through their subdivisions, and I think we kind of have a responsibility to address that on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And I do believe in provincial roads, if it's not posted, it is presumed to be an 80-kilometer zone in the rural, Councillor Eldon Hibb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going back to the boards that are set up. So you to Jesse, I guess. How long do we leave them up? Is there a certain length of time, Jesse, you leave them up, or?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, typically it's a 2-week interval. We do a week in ghost mode and a week in full flashing, and then move on to the next location. It's pretty steady rotations from location to location throughout the good seasonal location. They're always up somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's 2-week intervals to show a reasonable comparable, and then we move on to the next location in today's world.
Good, thank you.
That's it. Thank you, Councillor Hibb. CAO?
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to Councillor Garden Cole on the speed limit question. We have in the past written letters to TIR to request speed limits be reduced in subdivisions that they have provincial roads, and those requests, I believe, were denied. You know, there is history as well as for asking for reductions along the number 2 in certain areas, and those have been denied as well. Along the same lines as the crosswalk argument that they provide us.
Good. Any response, Garden? Sandra Garden Cole?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Good, very good. Anyone further have any discussion or question? Seeing no one, I would like to thank our RCMP counterparts for the presentation today. And wish them well for the next upcoming quarter, and hopefully it's quiet. But we can only hope at that time. And before I end, I'd just like to say I was in a meeting with the Nova Scotia Police Governance Association Zoom meeting this month, so I just, at the end of August, so I'd just like to report on that it was a non-eventful meeting, so other than that. Nothing further. I will now entertain a motion for adjournment to reconvene under Parks, Recreation, and Culture.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary of mine, motion's carried. We'll give a few seconds for our departure of our fellow RCMP officers, and we'll get at it. I'd like to call to order this Parks, Recreation, and Culture Committee. First order of business, approval of the minutes of July 20th, 2021. What is your wish?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary of mine, motion's carried. Next order of business is number 11, presentation from the East Dance Curling Association. Yeah, I think you can come right down front there after it gets.
You can come on down here.
Yeah, I think once you sit, you're pretty good.
Ready?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Good day. Harold McNeil, President of East Hants Curling Association. George Press, the Vice President of the Curling Association. Other members would be here, but we kind of wanted to make sure that we didn't overload the place, so we asked them to stay home. So good morning, councillors. We're here for a financial ask, and it's details is on the screen, and it's 1.7 million, and that's an updated cost from May of, and there'll be updated costs because the last cost was in May of 2020 by Lindsay Construction. The last council meeting I watched online, there was some talk about how we communicated with council. In the past, we've only ever communicated with the corridor councils. And then when we came to council, that's when we communicated with the non-corridor councils. So we just did what we did in the past. There's no slight intended. And then, like I said, the local engagements with the district's paying and then present to council. Correspondence. We've provided the business plan and we have assets of 122K. We provided questions and answers, 13 of them on the 18th of February 21. We did some clarification and observations on the 16th of December of 2020. We've supplied supports of list of curlers, both past and present. We've had lots of emails. We've had individual discussions with councillors, and we've had 15 years of past business plans and databases. So there's a tremendous amount of information that's gone into this project. The viability. This is our 4th year of operations. Our curlers are tired of subpar ice. Facility is needed to provide a dedicated curling ice each and every day, and it's a must now. We're very well financially situated for a one-day event membership. Most recently, we had a balance of about 43,000 in our account, so we're doing well financially. In the community, we have females, young males, adults, seniors, all ages and abilities participating with us at curling. We're lucky enough we had a grant from the Jumpstart. We got $15,000 to buy 3 sets of curling youth stones. We now have 4 because we had purchased 1 previously. The community that's most knowledgeable about curling, I feel, is our EHCA Board of Directors and the curlers that are there. We have some long in the tooth curlers and who've curled for many years and know the business and the sport inside out. Growing the game and retention. This is very important for us. Curlers are tired of the subpar curling ice. We have lost teams because of the ice. The multi-purpose curling facility will alleviate this, and it's a serious problem for us in the growing and the retention of curlers. They progressed their ability to play, and now they want, need, and expect ice to match their playing skills and abilities. So engagement. The board of directors are engaged constantly. Curlers are engaged constantly. We have lots of drop-ins. We have lots of spares. We're still perplexed at many times that so many people are still unaware of curling and surprised when they see an action. We have no TV out here. We have no radio. We have no newspaper. So it's a challenge for us to get the news out to people. Ex-Councillor McDonald, during his run for MLA, said to Houston, we're not a black hole between Halifax and Truro, and we would like to have a curling place in this non-black hole. So councillors, anybody here that's been down to watch us in action? Okay, thank you. Okay, the growth. Last year with seniors and retired and shift workers, we had a waiting list for our morning league, the only league we had last year on account of COVID-19. We didn't offer a youth program last year on account of COVID. We are working with Riverside Education Center and Hants East Rural High Schools to get the leagues going and their students playing. I'm actually in conversation with Troy Fugier out of Riverside Educational Center now to get his kids involved. And Hants East Rural High, we're still working with them. Parents and local have offered to assist us in growing the game. We have parents who take youth out of the community to curl. Curling is affordable physical activity sport option for East Hants people, again, of all ages and abilities. Community defines who we are, and the sport of curling is an excellent addition to any community. Lots of volunteering and lots of giving. Sportspersonship for physical activity could be 2 to 3 times a week. There's walking, there's a variety of exercises during the game, there's camaraderie, there's meeting, there's talking, and there's expertise development in improving their game of curling. The social interaction with the greater community is irreplaceable and necessary. We hear this a lot in our little get-together upstairs after curling. People are getting to know people in their community that they didn't know before, and some of them are their neighbors. So, looked at the East Hants Municipal Strategic Plan for 21 to 24, and I feel that we fit right in with the goal of providing infrastructure that addresses the need of a growing community. And then I look at the strong community part of that, objectives 1, 2, and 4. Number 1 is to facilitate and advocate for the creation of community infrastructure. We are one of those. Support sport, social recreation, we're one of those. And a long-term strategic plans for parks, recreation, and related facilities for the community. We add to your plan. We've always had the discussion about, is curling an expensive sport for the amount of people that's there? We don't feel it is, so took this comparison, and it's only a comparison. For curling for $5.1 million at 350 members, that's a lifetime investment of $14,000 plus per person. Curling at $55.1 million for 24,000 in the community, there's a lifetime investment of $212 per person. Aquatics, which will be the most significant and recent one, for 400 members would be $47,500 per person lifetime investment. Aquatics at 19 with 24,000 community members would be $791. So curling comes in under all of those numbers, and it's basic numbers. Boat activities have other events and very specific uses applicable to each activity and revenue streams. Curling can be provided at a very equitable cost per player and taxpayer. These basic facts show that curling is supportable using past funding practices and decisions. Vision of funding. We were never asked before about how it was going to pay for this. It was always going to be a levy in the corridor. We never talked about if we had access to surplus, reserves, etc. So with that, we see a funding of the surplus. Most recent in 2021 was $882,000, general tax rate. There's reserves, there's levies, there's the Canada Community Building Fund, which was the old gas tax, or a combination of above. That would be a council decision. So we came across this federal green and inclusive community building program. I made application to be accepted in it, and that was accepted on the 27th of April of 21. Then I had to fill out a big long forms online and did all that, and that was accepted on the 21st of May. So they gave us a file number, 191 there. Funding potential out of this is 60% for new, up to $3 million. 80% for renovations of $4 million, which we would hope we would tap into if we add on to the sportsplex. The only item missing from this file is East Hants Municipal Council funding. Every other piece of paper that they need is sitting there. Okay, operations. With the change in the sportsplex ownership, we envision no change in daily operations for our organization. We were designed to be attached and a standalone in the original design. We would pay for our own electrical system and payment, heat and lights. We have our own entrance and ability to operate independently. Shared expenses, we would share expenses with snow removal and any other item that requires connectivity with this main sportsplex building, which could be sewer and water. Shared expenses, we would benefit both the municipality, the arena association, and us. We presently use their ice technicians to make ice, and we would provide training for them to make good curling ice. We use their cleaning staff and kitchen staff, so there's money to be saved by both sides. Okay, I'm sure you've had some positive engagement with curling supporters, because there's lots of us out there. Curling would add to the sports available to the new 10,000 residents in the next however many years it takes to build all these new houses that are coming. We have 14,005 in the corridor area. The Shore Central is 42, and the Uniac Rodden is 4710. And these people are more than welcome to come curl at any point in time that they want. Okay, you read up on the many documents that we provided and many, many years of seeking funding approval. And we're open for questions. And I want to thank you for your funding support. I'm going to be optimistic here. The East Hants Curling Association asked for improving the community we all live in. So, available for questions.
Thank you for the report. Does anyone have any questions for the presenter? Seeing none, I thank you for the warden.
I just, I notice within the report, there is mention of surplus, and I just think it might be helpful if perhaps the CAO could clarify that that surplus is not just money sitting in the bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there is comment in the report about, financing and the ability for the municipality to pay for curling expansion in East Hants. That is a whole conversation that would have to happen. The surplus that the municipality has in reserves is specifically set aside for specific purposes, and each one of those reserves has a long-term planning component to it. There hasn't been anything set aside for curling in particular, nor for unidentified recreation assets. So the source of funding for a grant, if council were to award a grant to the Curling Association, would have to be debt. The last time we borrowed for a not-for-profit to fund an asset was the Sportsplex, and we required a private member's bill at that point in time. Where now we own that property, I'm not sure what the process would be, but that would be something we would have to look into. The municipality is not permitted under current legislation to borrow for an asset that they wouldn't own, so ownership would have to be a question. Other than that, as I've mentioned, the whole discussion around funding would have to look at who would pay for this. There has been some presumption that the same districts that pay for the Sportsplex area rate would pay for curling, but council has never taken that stance or had that discussion. So just elements of the financing discussion that would have to be considered if you decided to go further. We do have Adam, who's going to provide you with an overview of the history of this file on the agenda today as well, so we can talk more at that point.
Can I comment?
You can ask the question.
Question? Our point is that in the past, we were always told that there would be a levy, and well, no one wants to tax people on the levy. Well, if you look at the 882,000, which is savings, and I praise you to the highest for saving money all the time, but that amount of money that's saved at the end of the year would be less than the levies that would be assigned to pay for that per year. And that's the rationale for bringing that up.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the annual surplus the municipality has isn't a budgeted surplus. So the ebbs and flows of the budgets throughout the year, we usually have a small surplus at the end of each year, but it's not something we budget for. We don't raise taxes in order to have a surplus.
Understood.
So we would have to, if you anticipated having a levy, you would have to raise taxes because you don't budget for a surplus, like you don't budget for a deficit. So there would have to be a tax levy, and the question of who would pay that tax levy is something council's not discussed at this point. The surplus that you're referring to from 2020-21, that surplus has been allocated by council to other priorities of council. So for example, we have policing issues that are coming up in the next few years. Some of that money was allocated to lower the burden on increasing those policing costs over the next several years. So as we get those surpluses, we look at different priorities of council. And in that case, it was a general surplus, and it would have been allocated to a general expense such as policing.
But do you get my point? Like, in the last 4 years, roughly every year, there's been 800 and some odd $1,000 that has been surplus. As a taxpayer, when I look at that, and as a curling, and when I look at the entity and the levy, we could probably raise taxes and not get, or raise a levy and not get to the full top end of the budget that we would have. That's my point. Seems like there's money there, it's just in another pot.
But the money is earmarked. We do not budget for a surplus. We budget
I
for
understand.
zero,
I understand that.
right?
I understand 100%.
All right, Councillor Musa, do you have a question with regard to the presentation?
I have some clarification about surplus too, that not all surplus come from the corridor area.
Understood.
So we don't have any facilities over there. So if something should be done, should be grow in the rural area too, instead of thinking just of the one area. So it's,
If I lived over there, I'd be on your side.
thank you.
Seeing no other further questions with regard to the presentation, I thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, curling background report, Adam Clarkson.
Good morning. So if council recalls, in your June regular meeting of council, you directed staff to bring back a background report on the history of the East Hants curling as it relates to previous council discussions and decisions and so forth, just for a little bit more context. So just under the financial side, really this is a background report. However, as council just saw, there is a financial request of $1.7 million in front of council for the capital construction of a standalone curling facility. So a curling facility specifically is not identified in council's financial strategic plans. I'll get into that a little bit more further. On the surface, you can tie municipal infrastructure to our strategic plans, and that is and has been a priority of council, and I'll expand on that a little bit later. So as council probably noticed in your What's New on Council Chambers Online for July, item number 9 had a really lengthy list of, well, there's a 10-page document of previous council motions that the municipal clerk had put forward on there just chronologically, various staff reports and so forth. So I haven't really repeated all of that in this report, but what we have in front in the chart, it's just kind of a summary. I just took out some snapshots of that previous context. So really, when I looked at it from council engagement over the last 15 years, it really, the initial conversation started when the expansion of the Sportsplex occurred. Initially, it seems like there was discussion to have curling as part of that facility. And then through provincial conversations with the Arena Association and the Soccer Association, it was determined that a dome and an indoor field was the more appropriate need at the time. There was other levels of government funding of support for the facility at that time as well. So out of that, the Curling Association at the time came and presented to the council around the concern of the curling facility being removed from that plan. And since then, over the last 15 years, there's been multiple conversations. So in 2009, there was a staff report on viability of the facility. At that time, council received and placed the viability report on file. From there, over the 2009-10, there was quite a few conversations of utilizing the former Lance School site for curling and other municipal needs, and there was conversations of an agreement going forward to allocate some space for that, and the agreement was never executed, and it was received and placed on file with council at that time. So then there was additional requests from the group to have council representation on the Curling Association board in 2010, and council declined that request to have support on the board. In 2011, there was a funding request for a facility. Council of the time received and placed that funding request on file. In 2012, there was a presentation by the East Hants Curling Association to be considered during budget time. And council did consider to commit $600,000 in 2012 to a facility. And the commitment came with various conditions. In 2013, the funding agreement, there was a request to extend the agreement because the conditions had not been met at that time, and there was an extension of a funding agreement. In 2015, there was an additional request of $829,000, and council at that time in 2015 deferred it to a staff report. The staff report was presented, and funding for a facility was not approved at that time. Since then, in approximately 2018, actually into 2018, they started up in the Sportsplex in that season, that fall-winter season, and council provided some capital costs of almost $40,000 for equipment and so forth to allow the Curling Association to start a service inside the Sportsplex. There was some conversation around the old Milford Pool building being utilized for a curling facility. I'm not sure that space really met the needs of the Curling Association. There were just probably logistical challenges with the space, so there wasn't a formal expression of interest received for that facility. It was a surplus facility that was then disposed of through council's policy. Council then supported them in 2019 with some additional funding for equipment. And then in July of 2020, so previous to this council's election, the Curling Association presented to council requesting funding. At that time, there was a motion for a viability report, and the motion was defeated, so it didn't move forward. Then in January of this past year, that was when the request came back in from the Curling Association. Council, with COVID, declined the request at that time and agreed to review it in 6 months, hence the June conversation around a background report. That is really where we are today. That was a little bit of a mouthful, but the chart is there in your report, and it's a summary chart of the interactions. And I do know from looking through the background conversations, there was quite a bit of dialogue, but that is really the pertinent information that's been pulled out. So really, over the past 15 years, there's been quite a few requests for funding for a standalone curling facility. There's no financial reserves identified to contribute to a financial campaign. I should note the service did start out of the Sportsplex a few years ago, and it has been well received by the community. As you heard earlier, the challenges with quality of ice and so forth, are trying to improve equipment to make that service level better, but it does provide additional revenue to the Sportsplex while maximizing the ice usage. And council has been supporting that level of service through your operating grants, through your district recreation funds and so forth. So I guess the question for council would be, if you would like additional information from staff on this subject, like we haven't done a full in-depth review of their business plan and the model presented by the Curling Association. So we would do that as a step. There would be a feasibility and needs analysis for a standalone curling facility. Trying to do a needs analysis on one specific facility is challenging from a recreation services perspective when you're not looking at all of the needs of the community. We would have to compare and contrast infrastructure capital models, operating models. You've seen there's been a shift in the Sportsplex in the last few years and the sustainability of that model. We'd also review funding resources. So I've made a note in here, would be substantial staff time to do this. We're here to provide that information should council want. It would require planning staff time, 2 staff from the Parks Rec Culture Department and at least 2 staff from the Financial Department to do that comprehensive review, and it would be quite a lengthy process. The part to the council strategic plan, what I want to draw council's attention to in your current strategic plan that you just adopted, there is an objective specifically looking at long-term planning for parks recreation facility needs in your document and as an outcome of that. Determining a need for a curling facility would be part of the scope for future work of a future strategy. Including it in this stage would allow a comprehensive review and prioritization of long-term municipal facilities. So what your strategic plan is saying is we need to look at all of our recreation facilities now and into the future. We have significant growth coming in the municipality. And this would be a component of that planning document, and that planning would start in the next, in this term of this council. So I'm not sure when it would finish. The new director of Parks Rec Culture would work with the CAO and council to figure out where that fits in the work plan. So just kind of in summary, have provided council's decisions with the Curling Association over the past 15 years. We have an alternative in front of you to do a more deeper dive, or council can choose to look at it where it fits in with your long-term facility planning. And I have the recommendation just as part of the information report in front of you that council receive and file the report. That is the report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Adam, for the report. Councillors wishing to ask questions of the background report. Councillor Michael Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. This is kind of tied in. I know we're still undertaking the facility as assessment of condition for the sportsplex, and that's obviously going to have bearing on funds that need to be done to ensure the viability of that asset. How far along are we in that, and the projected timeline for a report on the state of the sportsplex? Because it does tie into how this could possibly proceed.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So council has secured ownership of the sportsplex. We're going to be organizing a community awareness event in a few weeks here just to kind of recognize the final steps of that. To your question around the facility condition assessment, we've started the background work on the scoping of that document. It hasn't gone out for tender yet. And then once it does, which will be in approximately the next 3 to 4 months, that would go out. And then it's probably going to be the remainder of a 4 to 6 month period when that review is complete. So you're looking at almost better part of a year before council or even at a staff level have a better understanding of long-term capital infrastructure needs for the sportsplex.
Okay, because I know as we went through the process, there was significant investment into things like compressors and stuff to keep the sportsplex operating throughout the transition period. So I would hope that we don't have any other big bills coming, but with what's already come forward, I would see there's probably going to be more required for the infrastructure upkeep of that building in the future. I look forward to hearing that report. That's all I have at this time, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Anyone further? Seeing no one else, we have a recommended motion. What is your wish? Ooh, Councillor Wayne Green.
Move the recommended motion.
And the recommended motion recommends to council to receive and file the East Hants Curling Association report, summary of council decisions dated September 13, 2021. Is that your? It's been duly moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Hibb. Councillor Michael Perry, you were back on again at just the same time as Councillor Green. I'll give you a little leeway there. After that, it will be toward the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. Adam, you mentioned before that this would fit into part of the scope for the recreation facility. By filing this on, does that take it away from that being part of that, or do you need a motion to include this in that feasibility study that is about to be undertaken through all municipal recreational assets? Or would that be included based upon all of the correspondence we've had with regard to the Curling Association up to this point.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It would be part of a larger facility planning process. I do want to say that's not commencing immediately or even this fiscal. It is part of your strategic plan 2021 to 2024. But to answer your question, it would be part of that.
So regardless, this is good. This topic will be part of that plan when it undertakes for consideration.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome, Councillor Perry. Seeing no one else, anyone else to the motion? Ready? Question has been called on the motion. We'll go to the vote. Results? Oh, do-do-do-do-do-dee.
Shirley, if you have the results.
Oh, I got them. Okay, and the motion has passed unanimously. Thank you, Adam, for that report, and I do believe that you are on for the next report, and which is park naming policy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Debbie is joining and is going to present most of the report. I'll start with the lead in here. I'll just wait. We're just going to connect the screen. And I'll just get going for committee here, as I know the first couple slides relate to what our presentation is for committee today. So as council recalls, you've adopted a Parks, Open Space and Active Transportation Master Plan in 2017. There are various goals and outcomes of that document, and council's diligently been working over that since you adopted that report with building new parks infrastructure, active transportation, and a piece of that document looks at governance and policies and policy gaps. And so really we've advanced one of the goals in the document today, which is bringing forward a park naming policy for council. It is a pretty standard policy that can be found across municipalities across the country. It really just provides a mechanism for council to approve the naming of your parks, or if questions come in from the community, the policy that surrounds that piece. And as council recalls, I believe the last two parks that you named were Wickwire and Brickyard Station Park, and that did come to the council level. And there was a little bit of community engagement through that to bring forward recommended names. So this just kind of takes your current practice and formalizes it. So I'll just pass it over to Debbie to go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to let the committee know that the policy was created by our planning intern, and I'm just presenting on her behalf today. So the park naming policy would apply to all parks and facilities owned and operated by the municipality. The purpose of the policy is to provide an appropriate name for all public parks owned by the municipality of East Hants, to ensure a consistent approach for naming park assets, and to provide guidelines for naming park processes, including criteria and opportunities for citizen input into the process. Council shall be responsible for the acceptance or rejection of park names. Changes to established park names shall be discouraged unless there is a recognized difficulties with the existing name. Park names can be administrative, so that means that administrative names reflect the location of the park. The location might be easily identified by well-known bordering street, natural feature, neighborhood, subdivision, or other factors. These factors will allow citizens to easily identify the location of a park. Park names could also be commemorative. Commemorative names may commemorate a historic event or an event of cultural significance or a family important to the municipality. Park names should demonstrate gender parity in commemorative naming and make an effort to commemorate members of our diverse communities, including but not limited to local Mi'kmaq and African Nova Scotian communities. At the discretion of council, municipal staff may solicit input from the public for park names. Such names shall be based on suggestions from the public or municipal outreach initiatives, such as naming contests. A variety of means to encourage public participation to submit the name may be implemented. However, council will hold the final decision-making power for any park naming process because sometimes interesting names can come about. And in conclusion, staff are recommending that council approve the draft park naming policy as attached to staff's report. So the full policy is attached to staff's report, and the recommended motions are shown on the screen.
Thank you
Thank
for
you, Mr.
that
Chair.
report. Anyone with any questions for the presenter or Mr. Clarkson? Councillor Michael Perry.
Thank you. So for this, at the end of the day, the policy gives considerations, but if the community wants it named a certain way, it comes to council for final approval, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it sets out a process, but council gets final approval on the park
Okay,
name.
perfect. I'll move the recommended motion.
I'll second it.
It's moved by Councillor Perry, seconded by Councillor Green. What is your wish? Question has been called on the motion. We'll go to the vote. And the results are in and it's passed unanimously. So we now, that'll go to council. All right, that brings us to the end of Parks, Recreation, and Culture Committee. I will entertain a motion for adjournment and break. To return, we will schedule for a break at 10:45. But since we are in the middle of in-between committees, it'll be up to your wishes. And we could take our 15 and come back and start off fresh and keep on going. How's that sound? Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Hibb. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
In favor? Motion carried. All right, next we have new employee introductions. And who is taking this one? Is it you? Okay, CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first new staff introduction that I have is Clancy Waite. She is the communications coordinator with us for the next 12 months. She's taking Aurora's maternity leave as she and her husband, Chris, welcomed a beautiful new baby in August. So Clancy has been with us since July. She comes to us from iSands, doing a lot of similar work there on a much larger scale. And from personal experience working with Clancy, she's phenomenal. She's stepped up with the resignation of our communications officer of late. And right now she is single-handedly handling our communications for the organization. So I thank her for that. Nothing like trial by fire. But she's doing a wonderful job. And last week, while she was on vacation and I was responsible for social media for the organization, I can tell you it's a stressful job. So I'm grateful for folks like her and what they do.
Oh, oops, wrong one. Sorry, Kate. There we go.
Good morning. On behalf of Corporate Services, we are thrilled to introduce Nathan Hoffman as our policy analyst. Many of you will remember Nathan from his time with us last summer working on environmental research and policy work, and specifically around sustainability and the Clean Energy Financing, or PACE program. He impressed us with his presentation skills and all-around professionalism. Nathan joins us from Dalhousie Residence, where he has spent a few years as the front desk supervisor and supported their facilities and operations folk with process and policy development. He's a graduate of Dalhousie's Master of Resource and Environmental Management. He has also completed courses in public policy and administration through Dal's Master of Public Administration program. We're excited to have Nathan in his new role as policy analyst. He will be responsible for all things policy, as well as supporting research and special projects for the CAO and yourselves. So please join me in welcoming Nathan back to East Hants.
Thank you, and on behalf of all council members, welcome Clancy and Nathan back, and I wish you all your best. Oh, we're not done yet, sorry. CAO?
John.
Oh, gotcha. You used to light up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think everyone knows that Pam retired after 30 plus years with the municipality, and that was those were big shoes to fill, but we're really pleased that Marley Langell arrived in mid-August to take up those duties, and so far it's been great. She really impressed us. Actually, she came from KC Concrete. My favorite story in her interview was you could tell she's a go-getter when she said that when she felt the guys weren't getting stuff out of the warehouse fast enough, she went and got her own training on a forklift so she could move things. So that's the kind of go-getter we got there. Thank you.
There we go. Go, Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I believe the last one on the list today is Chantal Kelly, our custodian. Appreciative that she's joined our team. She's come to the municipality with experience in the hospitality industry, and I had a pleasure of having a conversation with her the other day, and it's been a nice addition to our team. So thank you for Chantal, and there's an intro for her.
Now I'll say it again. Welcome everybody to East Hants. Thank you for joining the team. I hope you enjoy your time here because it is a great work environment from all accounts, what we hear, and we have great staff. Thank you. Moving on to the next part of the agenda, we will look at the Tinsmith and Walton Lighthouse lease agreements.
many steps during COVID here. Okay, thank you. Good morning. Through the chair. So this report covers 2 community group leases that are up for renewal in 2022. Staff are seeking direction to execute their 10-year renewal options. So it's for both the Walton Lighthouse and the Tinsmith Museum. So under the existing lease arrangements, the community groups are responsible for management and maintenance of the properties, and that includes ground maintenance, staffing, etc. You'll see under the financial impact statements that East Hants provides annual grants to help offset those operational maintenance expenses. We give $4,000 annually to the Walton Area Development Association, who runs the Walton Lighthouse, and we provide $11,000 annually to the East Hants Museum Society, which runs the Tinsmith Museum. Those annual grants have been the same since 2012, and so under this 10-year option for renewal, we're recommending that we adjust those to reflect CPI since 2012, and so you'd see an increase to $5,000 for Walton area and $13,000 annually for the East Hants Museum. And those would be through the general tax rate. Additionally, April's put this together for us. We've also been providing them grants through the tourism grant program and beautification grants. We're helping support their staffing costs and their insurance costs as well. Over the course of the last 10 years of the lease, we've seen a total of $97,800 for the Walton Area Development Association and $44,500 for the East Hants Museum Association. And as staff, we anticipate that these requests will continue under a 10-year renewal term as well. So our recommendation as staff is that we do execute the 10-year renewal option and that we do it as per current lease terms and conditions, but with an amendment to those annual operations and maintenance grants, an increase of $5,000 and $13,000 respectively, and then again adjusting those annually for CPI going forward. Both properties are extremely important to our East Hants tourism community, and as well as their nearby communities. And as such, staff are in support of these community groups continuing those operations and continuing the tourism offerings within those properties. Alternatively, if we do not wish to renew those leases, either one or both of those leases, we've identified some alternative options for you. The first one is to take over operations of the properties. Staff would have to return back with an additional report on this, as we have not done that kind of deep dive due diligence as to what those resources would be to take over operations of the properties. And the alternative option is to declare the property surplus and dispose of them. And you could do that by giving priority to the current tenants to purchase. You could do priority to other nonprofit organizations, or you could attain market value. Ultimately, staff are seeking direction to renew the leases for 10 years in alignment with current lease terms and conditions, but noting the adjustment for CPI. So I'll bring the motion up on the screen for you. And so 2 motions, very similar, one for each of the properties that we're talking about here today. First one being for the Walton Area Development Association, renewing for 10 years for the Walton Lighthouse, current lease terms and conditions, an amendment to increase the annual operations and maintenance grant to $5,000 starting in 2022, which would then be adjusted annually for CPI going forward. And the same for the East Hants Museum Society, 10 years for the Watson Smith & Sons Tinsmith Museum Shop, and current lease terms and conditions increased annually, $13,000 starting in 2022, and increased annually for CPI going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Warden Rolston.
Thank you. Just a question. We have been over the past number of years extremely fortunate to have very strong groups to operate these facilities and continue to do so today. But with the pressures on volunteer groups, we really don't have any way of looking 10 years into the future. So I guess my question is there something built into these leases should the unthinkable happen and either one of these groups become unable to continue in their present form?
Through the chair, I can speak on the lease side, and if there's any specific questions about the group, April can take on. But from the lease perspective, we do have termination clauses in our leases that allow both sides to have that communication and work back and forth with each other. So it's not an end-all be-all 10 years, but gives that opportunity for the full 10 years should we be successful that way.
Thank you. That's good to know. Also, I'm looking, and I certainly agree, I certainly agree that we should be increasing the funding we give these groups for their annual operations and maintenance outside of whatever they apply for in other grants, because what they apply for in other grants is also dependent on what other groups in the areas apply for funding and how much there is to go around. So, I mean, someone may shoot me on the spot, but I'd like to see those I'd like to see them increased a little more starting out and then increased by CPI, just to make sure they're not struggling trying to do fundraising and that, just to keep the lights on and that. So I guess my question is, are we sure that, we're only increasing $1,000 a year for Walton, and we're increasing $2,000 a year for the tinsmith shop. Is that enough? I just wondered, what have we increased them each by $5,000 to what they have now? It's not a lot of money out of our budget, but I just think it might make the lives of those hard-pressed volunteer groups a lot easier.
Through you, Mr. Chair, those discussions have not been directly had with the groups at this point in terms of what their wishes or desires might be for the operational funding. And if council wishes, we could certainly have those discussions. In seeing their books and financial records as part of both the tourism grant and their annual reporting as required through these leases, the groups certainly do a lot of hard work to fundraise, just like all of our community groups do. And both Walton Lighthouse and Tinsmith Museum do seem to operate within their budgets each year. So those are conversations we could certainly have. Adam, if you had any further comments, I'd welcome them as well. But it's certainly council's wish, absolutely.
Well, I think one of the difference in these are that these volunteer groups are fundraising to run municipally owned assets. Mm-hmm. And I just think that it would be a small price to pay to perhaps keep these groups from burnout over the next 10 years or so, if there wasn't perhaps quite the pressure on them to have to fundraise to continue to do it. And anyway, the motion hasn't been made yet, but if the motion is made, I will probably try an amendment to the motion when it's made. Thank you.
Okay, the director has a comment to make.
Can you scroll back up to your first page, please? Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just kind of speaking to some of the comments what the warden had mentioned, bringing the recommendation up to 5,000 and 13,000. If council does have that, council does have that discretion if you want to increase those amounts to your desire. If it is increasing it slightly, I think we wouldn't necessarily need to go back out to the group. The groups would really welcome it and increase to that amount. It would save them. They do. I do know both the groups do their fundraising, and Walton specifically does have a gift shop sales there that they're really trying to help generate their sustainability. So it's really back to council if you want to increase those more than what the recommendation is, and your decision to make.
Thank you. Do you have anything else, Warden?
Well, I understand, and I know that also the Tinsmith Museum is a larger property and probably has more expenses than the Walton Lighthouse does. So I will be rolling some numbers over in my mind as we continue the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rana.
Yes, there's no doubt that we have to preserve the history and increase tourism whenever this pandemic gets ended with. But if this motion passes, there's nothing to preclude going back to the groups and saying, okay, what is the actual need down the road, and bring this up at budget time and have that reported budget. Because this will be placed in the budget because it's not, as I understand it, it's not going to take place till 2022, correct? So then we could have a chance to go back out, and nothing says that we can't go and increase that that allotment again at budget time, and then we'll have a better kind of, have a good discussion with both of those groups, right? Because it may not be enough, right? It may not be enough, or maybe, you know, they have sufficient funds. We don't know. So I'd rather, I hear what the warden's saying, but I'd rather have a discussion with them, have a good one-on-one on them, and then give the, you know, now I have no problem with the way it's written here, but then again, budget time, then we could afford, then at that time, after talking to them, we could increase it at that time.
CAO is gonna weigh in now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The difference between this and other grants is this is a term in the lease document that we have. So if we want to put something other than the 5 and the 13, that's fine. What I would prefer to do is have those conversations now before the lease is finalized, because then it becomes a matter of record in the lease. So there's still a few months before we have to finalize this. So we could have those discussions and then come back to council with a lease with a different term. The one thing that does is there's a legal requirement then for council to budget that amount of money. So you don't at budget time have a choice to lower it. You could always increase it, but from a records management point of view and an agreement point of view, it would be better if we just got it figured out before budget time and put it in the lease as a term.
Councilor Rana?
No, I'm good.
Oh, you're good?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
All right, next on was Councilor Green.
Yeah, I could agree with you, Kim, on that. I think the discussion should happen now. Speaking for the Walton Group, they're not getting any younger. Put them out 10 years and you may not have a group. It is, and I look at the other assets around the municipality. We're mowing the lawns there. We're doing the maintenance down there. They've got volunteers coming to mow the grass. They've got, 70-year-old men trying to trim bushes outside that fence and whatnot. It's time. I think it's time we have a bigger look at all our facilities. And, I'll throw this out there. It may be time for a complete Parks Department to look after these assets, to take some of this pressure off these groups that like to go down, relay the history and stuff. But, when you're getting into the lawn mowing, the maintenance, the garbage cleanup, it's getting to be a lot. So just my comments.
Thank you, Councilor Green. Councilor Head.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having listened to the CAO, I think she made some very valuable points there, and we should look after this. I'm just going to throw some figures out there. Might be some quick discussion, but I think the Walton Lighthouse move, we just add $2,000 to the $5,000, and for the tinsmith go $13,000. We add $2,000 to that to $15,000. And if council just have a quick discussion and that is something that council would support or whatever at this time, I would be willing to make that motion. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Head. Warden Rolson.
Well, similar to Councillor Head, but I was being a little more generous when I rolled my numbers around. I was going to suggest that we increase the Walton number by $5,000 to a total of $9,000 and increase the tinsmith by $7,500 for a total of $18,500. The cost of doing stuff around these facilities is not going to go down. And I just think for a relatively small amount of money, budgetarily speaking, that, as Councillor Green said, that could make a big difference to these groups. And they both run gift shops and they do fundraise to try and help their organizations. And I think, having heard previously that there are clauses in the leases, and I'm sure if there were a discussion slated for down the road, similar to what Councillor Green had mentioned, I'm sure with mutual agreement on both parties, the lease could be terminated early and a different lease or a different arrangement put in place should we have the Parks Department take over maintenance and things such as that. So anyway, so similar to Councillor Hebb, I'm not sure what the motion is going to be. Guess it'll be whichever one of us gets to the button first to amend the amounts.
Is that everything, Warden?
That's it.
Councilor Musa. 1 second here, let it just click you on. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I 100% agree with the warden. I think 5,000 or 10,000, whatever it is, with volunteer go a long way, but if we took over those two assets, we don't have no volunteers, it's gonna be all paid off and it's gonna cost us probably triple times to run those. So we should support them and keep them there instead of making them leave and take over because it's gonna be very costly for the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Musa. Seeing nobody left to speak, if I could pass the chair to the warden to make a few comments. I totally agree with the conversation going on right now about increasing the funding. The one question I do have, because one of the major expenses for both these organizations would be the yard maintenance, right? Mowing the grass, trimming everything. That's a lot of time, and it does cost money. I'm wondering if I can ask Director Parks, what current assets are located near those that we currently maintain the facilities for? And if we were to take over the maintenance of the grass and the ditches and all that stuff, what would the estimated cost roughly be if there's nothing close in turn that can be done in kind work?
To you, Mr. Chair. I guess one I can answer and one I can't answer that easy without taking it back and doing a little further investigation. When I look at our current assets throughout the municipality and what we manage, we do have quite a few assets near the Tinsmith on our parks route. So that would be an easier one. The one in Walton is a further distance. Our closest assets are probably Burnt Coat Head Park, so it is quite logistically a longer distance. But to give you a specific cost, I'd have to go back and take a look at what that would require within our current resources, and if it would require additional resources.
Okay, thank you. No, because the reason I asked that is in talking to the groups, going back and talking to the groups and finding out if we alleviate that for the Tinsmith Museum because it is more feasible with closer assets for parks to do it, and it's not feasible for parks to do it for the Walton area, then we can adjust the funds accordingly so they can contract services or help subsidize for them doing that extra work based upon that. I do think some of this stuff, as Councillor Green brought up with the groups getting older, needs to be taken into consideration in some of those discussions, and sometimes might have to even be put to the groups like, look, maybe if you contract your services for this, we can give more, like, your funding will increase to cover off this maintenance so you don't have to. But I do agree that we probably do need to increase the funding. I'm glad it increases with CPI. 10 years is a long time for a volunteer organization. Most, I believe, have a lifespan of the original membership about 5 years. And these groups have been around for a long time. I look forward to hearing the rest of the discussion and seeing what's going on. But for me personally, I would probably be in line to do a conservative estimate on the funds right now till we talk to the groups. And then again, as the CAO mentioned, at budget time, we can always increase that based upon the feedback that comes back from them. We can't? So. It's more documentation. So would it be prudent to possibly send this back, to be brought back? Is there enough time to bring this back after talking to the group so we get a truer number so we can get it right the first time? Okay. Then that would be my preference moving forward. But there's more people to speak, so I'll stop there.
Just to comment on the logistics of Walton, it's only 15 minutes from Burncoat, and I believe we're mowing in Mount Uniacke now. So logistically, it's very within the realm of possible, I would say. So, just a comment.
And, yeah. Councillor Rhino, and then I'm going to turn the chair back over to Councillor Perry.
There's no motion on the floor right now, correct? I would move that this be sent back for staff to have a more in-depth conversation with the groups to find out definitely what is required, and so we get the amount right, and in the future, I so move.
Okay, Warden Rolston.
I have no objection to that. I just don't know how true a figure you're going to get from these groups, because I doubt if we've ever asked them before how much they need. And I doubt if they have any idea. Plus, they'll ask for as little as they think they can get away with because they'll think they'd be more apt to get it. So I still think we should give them, you know, I still like my numbers, but whether everybody else does or not, it's a personal choice. But I think perhaps it should open the door to future discussions down the road, as Councillor Green said, about our Parks Department. And I'm sure there's all kinds of logistical stuff in there, but there are a number of days or hours allotted to specific facilities or whatever. And I think maybe we've got to have the discussion to see, do we have enough resources to allocate for the number of hours or days that are needed to properly look after the properties that we have to look after. You know, I just think of things like, I had somebody tell me the other day they saw our guys out mowing somewhere in the pouring rain. Well, that's, you know, they shouldn't have to mow in the pouring rain, you know, and I know maybe sometimes they would, but I just, you know, just maybe it's time. We've been operating with our maintenance, parks maintenance department for quite some time, and maybe it's time. Maybe Adam already knows the answer, I don't know, but do we have adequate resources to look after what they're looking after within the municipality? So, and I would agree with Councillor Green that, you know, I understand that Walton's on the outer edge of the municipality, but it is part of the municipality, and so anyway, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Councillor Garden, Councillor.
Did you make a motion?
Yes. There was no seconder. Is there a seconder to the motion?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Councillor Garden Cole, I'm going to give you some leeway because you were in before the motion was second. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think just to reiterate what others are saying, I do like the idea Councillor Green mentioned about the aging volunteers. And if we were able to look after those properties and take the physical part away and then alleviate some of the financial burden as well, I think we'd be in a lot better position to hang on to those volunteers for a longer period of time. So that's my thoughts on it. However, we can make that happen. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Warden Rolston, to the motion.
Yeah, I'm not sure entirely how easy it's going to be to, it's at the end of the season. Tinsmith folks will probably be relatively easy. I'm not so sure about the Walton group, how easy it'll be to get them together to have some kind of a formal discussion. And like I said, I still have the concern that they won't know where this is coming from. We've never asked them, I don't think, before how much they need to operate. We've just given them some money and they've been grateful to get it. And just looking at the amounts and knowing what it, I can't hire anybody to mow my lawn in Knoll at the cottage, except my niece who mowed it on the weekend. But, you know, and what it would cost me, what I'd be willing to pay just to mow that lawn. And I think, I just think I think they're underfunded for what they're doing. And I'm fine to talk to them and bring this back, but I may still, at the end of the day, be advocating for more money than they ask for, because I don't think they probably have a true picture of what it would cost. So those are my comments. I'll support the motion for now, but I don't think we fund them enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Seeing nobody left to speak, we look for the question. Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. Okay, the vote is in. The motion passed 8-1 with Councillor Musa voting nay. Okay, brings us to the end of this one. The next one, we'll have the Shaw Brick Road naming. And we'll just wait for their... Oh, sorry. I'm on the wrong one. I'm taking one of Councillor Green's. The Clarksville Community Hall. Go ahead, Amy, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay, through the chair, kind of on the same conversation, not about leases, but about assets, and kind of former recreational assets at that. This report is to discuss the future of the former Clarksville School, which was most recently used as a community hall operated by the Clarksville Community Club. That club is no longer active. It was struck from the registry in 2007. Per the deed, that subject property, the Clarksville Community Club, is to be transferred back to the municipality when the club is no longer active. Staff have been in contact with members of the club who are supportive of taking this transfer and bringing the property back into the municipality's ownership. Currently there is no defined programming or municipal need for the property. So staff are declaring that when it's back in our ownership, that we declare it surplus, do a call for expressions of interest for the property at an as-is, where-is basis. From the financial perspective, the property currently falls under our F400 tax exemption bylaw. I want to note that it was rolled over on that for the last few years without contact being made with the community group. It's actually only been within the context of this investigation and this subject in front of us today that staff were actually able to make contact with this community group. There is sufficient budget in corporate services under professional services to support an as-is, where-is sale. That's for your costs like advertisement and legal. And we'll talk about some mothball activities later on in this report. We're talking insurance, securing the building and grounds maintenance. That's roughly about $10,000 to $13,000. Those costs were not anticipated for, but can be funded from year-end surplus or professional services reserves. The recommendation and motion in front of you today are about declaring the property surplus to municipal needs and doing an as-is, where-is call for expression of interest sale. The subject property, you can see it right here. It is located at the intersection of Highway 236 and Clarksville Road. It's about 1 acre in size. It's improved with the former one-room school building, an accessory building, and an abandoned swing playset. So this whole situation came to light last summer in July 2020. We had a neighboring property owner reach out through our economic and business development team asking about the property. It was at that motion, we didn't realize much about the subject property at the time when the question came up, so staff had to do some digging. And we were able to discover that it was the Clarksville School in the early 1910s, and it operated as such until about 1955 to 1960. It depends what you read, what date you get there. And we do know that it was transferred to the municipality under the Municipal Act of 1954 around 1960. We know that in 1963, we leased the subject property to what was the first iteration of the Clarksville Community Club. That club made multiple trustee changes, but they incorporated as a society with the registry in 1990, which is how we know the group of today. In 1991, we transferred the property over to that club. We gave them ownership, but we put a buyback clause on it so that if they were no longer active, the property was to come back to us. And in 1995, that club defaulted with the registry, but it wasn't struck off the registry officially until about 2007, which is a typical timeline, about a 10-year timeline. The club did actually, I've met with 2 members of the club. They've handed us over all the historical records that they have, and we reviewed them, and we can see that they tried in the late 1990s to early 2000s to keep themselves in operation, but there's no records beyond 2004. So like I said, I've been in contact with 2 community club members, Carol Wells, who is a member of the club, and also Elaine Winchcombe, who has confirmed that she is the remaining surviving trustee of the club. In August of this year, we met with Carol on site, and she gave us a tour of the property. We were able to enter the former school building. We weren't able to enter the accessory building. It's locked, and they don't have a key for that at this point. There is an appendix with an inspection report done by some of our building inspectors. But kind of as a summary, there's no power. There's evidence of water damage, suspect mold. The roof requires replacement, and there's a number of structural and building envelope issues as well that we would need to give attention to. And the report says that if there's really a desire to keep the building, rehab activity should happen sooner rather than later. So as I mentioned, per the deed, the subject property is to be transferred back to the municipality, and a surviving trustee is required to do this, and that is something that Elaine has agreed to support. And as a surviving trustee, she's the only person that can actually do this for us, so the timing is important that we have these conversations sooner rather than later. I'd also like to highlight that there's been no discussions with community members about what the municipality will do at the site once it's been in municipal ownership. We haven't gone down any of those routes with the community members. So in terms of options of what we can do, we can either keep the property under ownership or proceed with declaring it surplus and selling it. Staff are recommending the surplus route. Again, like I said, as is where is sale, so we don't put any money into the rehab. That's part of the sale considerations, and we do it via call for expressions of interest for the best bid received. We do recognize that it may take significant time to go, many months rather, to go through an expression of interest process. And because there are some security concerns with the building, we do have what we call some mothball activities that we think need to be done sooner rather than later. So immediate attention in terms of adding it to our property insurance, securing the building in terms of the doors, the damaged landing that there's there as well, tarping the roof so that no more water comes in, and then also the ground maintenance, an annual reoccurring cost on that. This was not anticipated as part of the 21-22 budget, so BOE is required. As mentioned at the beginning, it could be funded from the year-end surplus or professional services reviews for this up to $13,000 expected cost. Alternative to a as-is-where-is sale, we could demolish the building and maintain the property in our inventory as open space. Staff would have to proceed with retaining quotes for demolition, but based off comparables, past expenses, we anticipate this to be about $15,000 to $25,000. Again, this was not budgeted for, and we'd also still have to do the insurance and the ground maintenance at approximately $5,000 to $8,000 for those items. Alternative disposal routes, you could do a public auction, sale by listing agent, direct sale in the open market, or sale to a nonprofit organization. I'm just going to jump over to the appendices with photos and share those with you. So you can see from our walkthrough in August with Carol. So this is the view from Clarksville Road. You can kind of see the grounds haven't been maintained in a while. My car made the driveway for us. You can see the Clarksville School, one-room schoolhouse. You've got the playset, which is kind of hard to see due to the sun in the photo. Another view here of the schoolhouse in the accessory building, which we're unfortunately not able to get into, but we were able to kind of prop open the door enough to stick our heads in and see that there's kind of some debris and some damage to the roof of that building as well. The front entranceway, you can see some wood rot and overgrown vegetation. As part of the mothballing activities, we would secure up this door, we would block up the staircase, some security and safety measures there. Same here with the ramp, overgrown. In terms of internally, you can see some water damage on the ceiling tiles up here, evidence of degradation onto the surfaces of building materials, evidence of pooling water on the wood floors as well. A view going back the other way, just to continue showing you the same items. And then your last photo here, you can see that it is, the heating system is an uncertified wood stove. And this is your little electrical panel. There is no power, and the electrical would have to be completely updated for any kind of rehab activities here. So in terms of the motion, bring that back up for you. There's 3 motions in front of you as part of this report. The first one would be for declaring it surplus to municipal needs. The second one would be the call for expressions of interest on an as-is-where-is basis, which would then authorize the CEO to enter into an agreement of sale with the successful bidder. And the third, that any costs incurred for required mothball activities be funded through the year-end surplus or professional services reserves for an amount up to $13,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Warden Rolls.
Thank you. Yes, this building is in my district, and the 2 ladies that you have been discussing, you know, the community representatives who would have the most knowledge. The only thing that concerns me here is the statement that there's been no notification or discussion with the broader community. about the plan. And I agree that it should be deemed surplus, and I don't think we should keep it. But I don't want to get into another situation where we have a very upset community. And I have no reason to think that we would in this case. But before we moved forward to disposing of it, is there some type of advertisement or something within the community we could do to ensure that all of the local people in the Clarksville community would be aware that the municipality is taking ownership and intends to divest itself of the property? And that gives anyone in the community the opportunity to A, purchase a property, or B, form a group to purchase or talk to us about the property. That's my only concern. I'd like to see some type of advertisement or consultation within the larger community, and even probably advertisement to make sure that it's known would be sufficient. Other than that, I think it's I look at the pictures of the building and I think, the blackboards are still there. That looks like a hardwood floor, and, what a shame. I kind of have a little hope that whoever finally gets the ownership of it would be interested in restoring it, but whether they would or not, who knows? So those are my comments for now, and I just wonder if within these motions there is any room to do some targeted, advertising or knowledge spreading of some type.
If I may, through the chair, that's part of the call for expressions process. That's why I guess I could have been more clear in my report, but part of the reason why staff are recommending that route is it gives us that flexibility to put that into the advertisement around a call for expression of interest. And I've actually had conversations preliminary with our procurement officer about the advertisement element and how do we make it accessible to those members of the community who might not be reaching it the same way, say, members of a corridor or the business community would. And so we talked about signage in the neighborhood and how we can spread that message and kind of meet the neighbors where they're at. I did end up having a little conversation with the woman who lives across the street from it when I was on site, because, nosy neighbors watching me walk around the property, and they came out to say hi and see what we were doing. And what I mean by we did not have any conversations with them is I haven't given them any promises. We haven't set any expectations. Basically, this needs to come back to council, staff will have recommendations, and then ABC will happen from there. But when I talked with them, she said, well, I don't know if I would know about this happening if it wasn't kind of a sign right here. And I said, those are things we're absolutely going to be taking into consideration as how we can bring this message to the community. Again, no promises within it, but it gives them that opportunity to see what we're doing. And that, like you said, maybe an opportunity to group together or whatever that narrative looks like moving forward.
And so because there have been no community discussions as such, we, at least at present, we have no... the people that we have spoken to are in favor of this happening.
Yes, through the chair, both of them are. I spoke with Carol first. Carol put me in contact with Elaine. We've had the conversations that we need to have from the legal perspective, if you will, for the deed coming back. But both of them, they have to be the ones that sign the paper. They are the ones that have to support it coming back to us in order to facilitate that deed. But we've had those conversations of, hey, this is what the deed says. This is XYZ, are you guys in support of this? And I have it in writing from Elaine on file that says she's in support of whatever it takes to transfer it back to the municipality. They're not actively involved in this group anymore. They're still actively within their community in that sense, but not within the Clarksville Community Club as we know it within the legal factions of this situation.
And they understand that we won't be keeping it and maintaining it?
I said it's going to be coming back to council, and council makes the decision, but staff will have a recommendation. So that's what I mean by we haven't had any formal conversations with the community group, and that we haven't promised them what is going, or told them what is going to happen, that is a report that goes back to council, and it is a council decision how we move forward, whether it's kept in our inventory. I've given them kind of what the options are. It can be kept in municipal inventory, it can be disposed of, community members, etc.
I would rather those folks that are going to sign those papers to deed that back over, understanding the legalities. I would like to know that they understand what the probable intent would be with the property. I wouldn't want them to think that it's going to be deeded to the municipality and we're going to restore it upgraded.
Through the chair, absolutely. So following council-approved motion, so if the motion, as per today, is successful, I would go back and call Elaine and call Carol and have the conversation with them that says, we are now preparing the deed, and this is a council motion attached to it, which means we are now going to be putting it up for call for expression, and it will be sold, and they will know that before they sign any paperwork, absolutely.
I would rather they had known that before we made that motion so that I knew what the thoughts behind that were before.
They do
deciding.
know that this was coming in front of council. They do know this conversation was coming in front of council.
But do they know what the recommendation was?
Through the chair, not specifically in this exact language, but in the context, yes.
Well, I guess I am in general support of this, but I need to be reassured that there is good understanding around this before I would vote in favor of putting it forward for an expression of interest. I just need to know that these folks understand that by deeding it back to the municipality doesn't mean it's going to continue to exist, that they understand what's going to happen. And I'm not sure that I'm hearing that that's been made clear. So that's my concern. Thank you.
Okay, the CAO is going to offer some clarification once the computer cooperates. There you go.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I understand the warden's hesitation. What we will commit to is prior to council night, if this is the motion that goes forward, we will absolutely have the conversation with those two individuals specifically. And we'll also look into how we engage the community of Clarksville. It's not a very big community. So if we move forward with this motion, what that engagement would look like, whether it be letters to individual residents or, signs up in the community, whatever that looks like, we will have that information for council on Wednesday evening prior to council making the decision.
So the second part, if I could, of that, authorizing the call for expressions or interest, could we add to the end of that, subject to discussions to be held prior to council? I just know that in the disposal of another old schoolhouse in this municipality, it was difficult, and I just...
Okay, that's good. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Councilor Green was next.
Yeah, much along the same lines as the warden. We don't want to get into another one. But I will say, I don't know if it was in Kate's time or not, when the Tennecape Community Hall was going to disband. They came to us, and then they had discussions within their community, and there was 16 new members appeared. And the hall now thrives. They operate a small cafe out of it. So before we jump, the community should be made aware there may be 15 new members there. I don't know. I'm not thinking there will be, but you never know. So.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Green. Councilor Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Just a question through you to the Director of Parks and Recreation. I assume you've given careful consideration to this property on the corner lot and deemed it's not necessary?
Go ahead.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair.
Oh. There you go.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we don't have a planned or defined need for it at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Seeing no one left to speak, and we just seem to lose power with the motion. Was anybody ready to move the recommended motion? There we go. Warden Rolls.
I will move the first motion, which is that the Corporate and Residential Services Committee, no, that's not the first one, is it? Yes. Okay, we have to get it into municipal ownership before any of these motions. So I would move that the Corporate and Residential Services Committee recommend that council deem the former Clarksville school property, PID 451492883, surplus to municipal needs.
Seconded by Councillor Green. Any discussion? Question on the motion. We'll go to the vote. All the votes are in, and it is passed unanimously.
If I could, I would move that between now and council night, staff engage with discussions with the community members as discussed, and that subject to those discussions, that corporate and residential service, subject to the outcome of those discussions, that corporate and residential services recommend that council authorize staff to call for expressions of interest to purchase the former Clarksville school property, PID 451492883, on an as-is, where-is basis, and authorize the CAO to enter into an agreement of purchase and sale with the successful bidder.
You have the motion. Seconded by Councillor Garden Cole. Councillor Rhino was on before the motion.
I guess I'm questioning, is that enough time?
Just hold on a second there, Keith. There you go. Now,
Okay?
you're good.
No, I guess I'm questioning the time. You're gonna say you're gonna do this quote, and I know Clarksville's, you know, a relatively small area. But it's not so much Clarksville, you know, confined to its boundaries. It may be people on the outskirts of those boundaries that may have some influence or would like to have a part in the discussion. That I really don't think that, you know, oh yeah, by council night, we're gonna talk to everybody in Clarksville. I think more time should be given to touch with people, and because there may be some houses on the other side of that border who people may have an interest in something like that. So I just don't think that motion gives us enough time to get a true and accurate thing. You know, we may be able to cover the places within its borders, but I'm a little leery of people on those on the cusp of those borders that may have an interest in this too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rhino. CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, and the warden can clarify what her motion, the intent of her motion was, but when I was referring to talking with folks between now and council, it was the two trustees, the former trustee, and that was my understanding of what the warden was looking for.
Yep, just 1 second. Waiting for your mic to come back on. There you go.
I guess for me, I took it as you were going to discuss with the community members in the vicinity of Clarksville. That's what I took it, not just the two that we have been talking about here this morning. And again, how can, you know, Councillor Ralston is the councillor of that district, so how can she be assured just by talking to two people that she's got the better, you know, is they are talking on behalf of the community. And Councillor Olson can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the way I understood it. We were going out and directly talk to the people of Clarksville. Thank you.
Well, if I could, to just throw it out there, it's going to take some time to get this deed and before it actually belongs to us. Would there be, we've passed the first motion. Perhaps at this point in time, with the agreement of a seconder, I would withdraw the second motion and simply make a motion that staff, I guess the problem being staff couldn't tell these ladies or anything else what council was planning to do because we hadn't passed a motion saying what we were going to do. But perhaps a motion instructing staff to discuss with the two ladies and provide some preliminary information to the community that it would be the municipality's intent to dispose of the property once it is owned, and perhaps wait until October council and come back at October committee to, determine at that time if this is the process we're going to file. So if a seconder would agree, I would withdraw my motion.
Councillor Garden-Cole?
And I'm in agreement with that.
So then, if I could, I would replace that motion to instruct staff to discuss with the trustees, the remaining trustees of the hall, the discussion that council has had, and that at this point in time, it would not be council's intent to retain the building, and that it would be disposed of, preferably by the process described there. And to get some preliminary information out to the community that would be the intent. And then to bring any results of those discussions back to October executive for a decision on how we would dispose of the building. Does that work?
That works for you, CEO?
So that's my motion. I hope somebody was typing very quickly.
Is there a seconder to the motion? Seconded by Councillor Hebb. On before the motion, Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know, I'm very confused now. Like, how can we declare something that we don't own a surplus before we own it? And if the people know that that's gonna happen, they might not give it to us. So I think we're putting the cart before the horse. I don't know if that's
I don't
something.
think there's any danger. These folks don't want the liability of that building.
No, but I mean, how can you declare something surplus to you if you don't own it yet? So,
I did mention, I do believe that the intent of that motion was so that staff could do that once the deed was executed. If a deed's not executed, we obviously can't do that.
Through the chair, it's a bit challenging to explain, so please bear with me and I appreciate your patience, but the property, per the deed, the property is to return back to the municipality when it is no longer being utilized as a community club by the Clarksville Community Club, or as community hall by the Clarksville Community Club. It is no longer being used as that, and therefore by the deed, it is to come back to us as per the buyback clauses that we enacted in 1991. Elaine is there's only one surviving trustee, and that is Elaine. Carol is a community club member. Carol happened to have the records, happens to have the keys, happens to be supporting us, and is supporting Elaine. I've been in conversation with both of them. Elaine is the only person who is signing authority. Elaine is needed to sign the deed to, I guess, fully legalize the transition of it back to the municipality. There isn't much of an argument that can be had about whether or not it should or should not come back to the municipality because it's under the 1991 deed, which only Elaine is the legal representative of the Clarksville Community Club. They are no longer part of the registry. They were struck from the registry in 2007. So I'm not a lawyer and I don't work for the registry, so I can't speak specifically on some of those activities, but I think it would be extremely challenging to add new members as trustees to a club that has been struck off the registry for more than a decade. So it would have to be a new club that would have to be enacted, and they would have to come to us as what would be the legal owners of the property at that time. The property's kind of in a limbo, but leaning towards us, if you will. Elaine brings it entirely towards us from her signature on a piece of paper. It would then be a new club that would have to be enacted that then would come to us. We would then kind of go through this whole process again and deed it to them or lease it to them. And so I don't know if that brings a little bit more clarification to it, but there's not, I think it's challenging for us to have an argument over whether or not this should or should not come back to the municipality based off kind of the chain of title or the legality of the deed. Really, the only option is for Elaine to sign this paper over to us. If Elaine doesn't, it's a whole nother convoluted process. If something happens to Elaine, if she either decides to sign off her participation as a surviving trustee or, God forbid, something worse happened to Elaine and there's no surviving trustees, typically these properties are then vested to the province, And then we have kind of an Elmsdale Recreation Association situation, which you'll see in front of you at some point, in which we have to go through a Department of Justice application to have that property, which should have been relatively easily transferred to us by way of Eileen's signature, actually through a Department of Justice application through the province to have it come back to us as per the 1991 deed. So I know I didn't want to have to get into all those different levels. It is kind of convoluted, but I do hope that that brings a little bit of clarification to you and kind of the situation that we're in. Thank you.
Is there anything else, Councillor Musa?
Yes, thank you for the clarification. So that brings us to Councilor Rhino. So talking to those two people who don't have no interest in it is not going to make any difference. So I think what we should do is take the school back, then bring it back and decide what we're going to do with it. But the first thing we should do is take the deed back instead of doing all that stuff before consultation with the community. Thank you.
Councillor Rhino.
And I really like the explanation she gave you, that Ms. Pine gave us. I think we should hold her on a retainer. Thank you.
My thing just went right up my gallery, right?
Okay, Warden Rolston, with the new information, is there anything you'd like to change? Is there anything you'd like to say?
No, because in my mind, the property does actually belong to us. It just simply hasn't been formalized yet, because by the terms of the deed, it's very clearly states that it reverts to us when the club ceases to exist, and the club has legally ceased to exist because it's been struck off the registry. So there is a formality of getting a signature that makes it much easier. So I don't think there's any doubt that the property is coming back to us, and the motion that we passed earlier makes it clear that we intend to declare it surplus. And the motion that I have on the floor now simply asks for some dissemination of information to interested and appropriate people in the community of what council's probable intent will be to do with the property before we make a final decision. And that allows for an 11th hour tenant cape situation to occur, should it occur, and it allows people to understand what's going to happen. And it removes any chance of people coming back and saying, we were blindsided by this. We didn't know it was going to be sold. I didn't know it was going to be sold. He knew it was going to be sold over there. I'd have put an offer in if I'd known. It just eliminates a lot of that stuff. And I think we'll be at the same place at the end of the day. But I just like to put that step in there before we make the second motion that's on the screen, so.
Okay, seeing nobody left to speak, I'm going to pass the chair over to the warden. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I got a little confused with the motions coming and going and coming and going. So just for clarification, we are going to take possession of this property as soon as possible because the group is in default and technically it should have been turned over to us in 2007. Okay. And the only thing that's happening now is that we are waiting before putting it on the market to talk to the public. Okay. I'm fine with that. It just seemed like we were waiting to take possession of it until we talked to the public. No, we'll take possession of it right away. We'll get Miss Elaine's signature. We'll move forward, and then if any community group pops up in the meantime, they can approach us, and we can always change our motion of how we're going to deal with it. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted that clarification and ensure everybody else was in the same line of thinking as I was. Thank you.
Question?
Good. Question's been called. Turn the mic there. Motion has passed unanimously. I'll turn the chair back over to Councillor Perry.
Okay.
And if I could, I'll make that final. Do we probably still need that final motion regardless? So I would move at any costs incurred for required mothball activities be funded through year-end surplus or professional services reserve up to an amount of $13,000.
Moved by the warden. Seconded by Councillor Hepp.
Question?
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. And all the votes are in, and it's passed unanimously. That brings us to the end of Corporate and Residential Services Committee. I will be looking for an adjournment. It is now 5 to 12. We'll adjourn for lunch and reconvene at 1:30. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? We are adjourned till 1:30, where we reconvene for Planning Advisory Committee with Councillor Green.